Kia ora and welcome back to the next video in my allotment garden series. Right now I am in a beautiful garden. This is not my own. This is the gardens of the old government house here at the University of Auckland. These are all some specimen trees next to me, and this one just on my left is a rimu planted by Queen Elizabeth II on the 30th of December 1953. So it's a decent little tree there. And what I have here is, I'm doing you a favour. There are 15 books in the Auckland City Libraries that talk about community and allotment gardening, because basically, from what I understand, that gardening in allotments and in community gardens is kind of fundamentally different from gardening at home, right? So you're in a different environment, it's set up differently, and the things you need to think about and plan ahead and things like that are different. So what I did was I got out all 15 books from the library. I've read them all so that you don't have to, and I'm going to summarize them in the next couple of minutes. So first book up is this one, The Urban Vegetable Patch by Grace Paul. Now this is actually a great book, a great first one to read, and if you're starting off like I am, I would recommend you start here as well. Not necessarily all the tips are going to be the most relevant for everyone. Grace was writing from London, but she's gone through the same kind of process. You know, she started off with nothing. I've killed every plant that I've ever come across, and I want to improve on that. So she's a great place to start and getting a good idea of what you can do. All right, and then I've got three other great introductory books. I'll just lift them down off the pile before I knock the pile over. So Allotment Gardening by Jez Abbott, No Dig Organic Home and Garden by Charles Dowdy and Stephanie Hafferty, and the DK Allotment Through the Year by Alan Buckingham. Right, so these are all set for the UK, so you do have to add or subtract 6 months. So when they're saying, oh, here's what you should be doing in March, start thinking September. But they all provide kind of just a good introduction about getting started in allotment gardening, talk about some of the pests, some of the things you've got to watch out for as you work through the year. Just good kind of vaguely introductory stuff. A lot of allotments and community gardens are vaguely organic, and this is because you can't control your environment. So if you were to start spraying, you wouldn't just be spraying your garden, you'd be spraying the neighbours. Now, of course, this happens everywhere, happens on farms. It's worse when you're talking about small and combined gardening. And these, you know, all have provided me with some really great information and just things to think about when you're getting started. Next one up on the list is Planting Plans for Your Kitchen Garden by Holly Farrell. This one I really quite loved because as you go through, it tells you about different styles you can have. Now, of course, you'd have to adapt these. These aren't quite explicit thinking about allotment and community garden, but it is thinking about small gardens and ways of really utilizing your space, which is basically the same thing. But what she does is she talks about the different designs, well, lots of words, but also lots of pictures. So here we go. So she talks about design, and then she gives you a plan of how to actually do it, how to measure it out, when you need to be planting the different things, how they need to swap out. So as the seasons change and you need to swap out plants, and as you need to think about different sizes, different requirements, who needs water, who needs sun, who needs backing up. Right, so the next 4 books are all what I call just general allotment books. Len Durnt's The Half Hour Allotment. A lot of people talk about how when you're working on allotments and community gardens, you need to think about a little bit often. You know, this isn't like head out to your garden, your front garden on the weekend and knock out 8 hours. This is about being much more economical with your time and a lot more efficient. And so they're sort of saying 5-6 days a week, spend half an hour down there, and that's actually going to be way more effective. And so in this one, which is published by the Royal Horticultural Society, so another Northern Hemisphere one, unfortunately that's going to be a running theme with these sorts of books. It takes you through all the different steps you need to establish an allotment garden and talks about some of the steps you need to do. So this chapter is about nurturing your plants, and lots of pictures and then talking about, you know, things like forcing, about bracing, about compost, crop rotation, compost again, and all these sorts of things, and actually gives you a good sort of general introduction. So I'm not necessarily saying that you need to go out and buy this particularly, get it from the library and have a read. Along the same lines is the Big Allotment Challenge by Tessa Everley. This is another UK one. This one seems, now I didn't quite understand it, but it seems that this was following, I didn't really quite understand it, but it does seem that this one's following a reality TV allotment garden show competition. So there is a lot of stuff in there where you're like, well, I wasn't really watching the show, so this part isn't so relevant for me. But it takes you through all the steps that the contestants went through, the things that you need to think about, and learning from some of their mistakes. And so this is a nice, another good sort of book. This one is Veg in One Bed by Hugh Richards, and this one breaks down various styles and forms of gardening into monthly tasks and processes. So this one is quite sort of much more like if you've ever read the old Farmer's Almanacs. And so this one, for example, this one's talking about, here we go, April at a glance, planting out, and it's just saying that, well, you know, your lettuces are going to be coming in and your potatoes are going to be coming out soon, and the radishes that will go soon, and then talking about, you know, this month do this, that month do that. And so this one is a bit more prescriptivist, which doesn't quite suit me. Here's Hugh himself. Plus, you know, once again, it's based on the UK, so you need to sort of take a bit of creative license when you're operating in the Southern Hemisphere like I am. I lied, I said there were 4 in this section, there's actually 5. And this one is The Perfect Plot, Starting an Allotment from Scratch by Kim Sayer and Christine Walkden. This is another one that talks about something that happened in real life. So in this case, it's not a reality TV show, but actually just a community that came together and made an allotment, or forced their council to make an allotment, which isn't something that we can do in New Zealand. But this one talks about the stages they went through. Really fascinating to just, you know, learn how this community came together. Lots of good pictures, talking about how they got started. Once again, one of those things where it talks you through some of the steps, but mostly how to learn from their mistakes. And they had quite a few. And then the last one in this section is Allotment, the Handbook and Planner by the Royal Horticultural Society. It's another one by the RHS, and so of course another UK one. This one breaks down various styles and forms of gardening into monthly tasks and processes, just like Hugh's one did, but it includes, for each of the sections, what I'd wish I'd known at the time. The author is really going, or the authors are really going through and explaining what they wish you'd known. So for example, if we look here, this one's talking about French beans, talks a bit more about it, talks about sowing, growing, harvesting, yield, things you need to think about for climbing, a quick summary down here, this box, almost all of them have this, and then what I wish I'd known when I started. And so in this case, they're saying you can increase the cropping period to more than 5 months by making successional sowings from late spring to midsummer after the initial cropping, water and feed plants for a secondary crop. And then goes through and talks about specifically different varieties that you need to think about. You know, Brussels sprouts, I wish I'd known F1 hybrid varieties are usually the best choice, blah, 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 blah. Kale, what I wish I'd known, obviously, that you should just throw kale out and not eat it. No, apparently kale could be grown as a cut and come again crop. Basil, what I wish I'd known, basil resents having wet leaves or sitting in saturated soil overnight. Water at the base rather than overhead, early in the day at a time when it's not in the full sun. So this is another actually quite useful thing. Go through, so what I did was I looked through at the plants that I thought that I would like to grow or that I already had in the garden, made some notes from that. Good to come back to though, I think. So this first couple of sections that I looked at were about sort of basically getting started and some general advice on working in allotments and community gardens. These next 3 books are about planting. Here, this first one is not actually a library book. This is one my mum gave me, and it's about companion planting, and it's by Brenda Little and illustrated by Ken Gilroy. And it's alphabetical, and it's written in New Zealand by New Zealanders, and so it's got some very good examples and some New Zealand vernacular. So a lot of the books about allotment gardening and community gardening talk about companion planting, and they say, you know, because you're trying to work the most efficient way that you can, and so as well as trying to work reasonably organically as well. So companion planting is really where you can help out there. So this is that little stuff like finding out that marigolds have a compound in them that repel a lot of insects, knowing that nasturtiums can repel certain insects but be sacrificial to others. So if you plant nasturtiums next to a high value crop, the insects will come in and eat this nasturtiums before they eat your high value crop, and little stuff like that. So really great book, and thanks Mum for giving this one to me. Oh, this absolute encyclopedic tome, Growing Vegetables, Herbs and Fruit, a step-by-step guide to kitchen allotment gardening with 1,400 photographs by Richard Bird and Jessica Houdret. What can I say? It's a plant encyclopedia. It's thick as anything, lots of pictures, lots of detail, and advice on everything, you know, putting down bricks to capture heat, ways of training your fruit trees to grow this way instead of this way, and all sorts of useful stuff like that. And of course, John Walker's How to Create an Eco Garden, relatively self-explanatory, how to create an eco garden. So it's got some specifics here about organic gardening and the sort of things you need to think of and how you can do it, and just challenging your views. Like if you've done gardening before and you're used to just whacking up a bit of spray or artificial fertilizer, some other ways of going about it. And once again, talking about companion planting, talking about reusing things from around the garden and just making things nice and eco-friendly. Now, the last 3 books that I have here are only written by 2 authors. These I found were really fascinating, but of course they're actually quite different to the other book, because these provide a history of allotment and community gardening. As I've probably talked about before, the history of allotment gardening is really tied to the history of labour, of workers' rights, of modern democracy as we know it. And it's really crazy to think, but it is. And of course, I am doing a blog post where I sort of summarise what I've learned from these 3 books into sort of a chronological history of allotment gardening and how fascinating that is. And I mean, because the modern allotment garden is relatively new. It comes from the 19th century, and community gardens really from the middle of the 20th century, from the UK and from the US. But so we've got here Allotments by Twigs Way. Also by Twigs Way, A Passion for Gardening, How the British Became a Nation of Gardeners, also by Twigs Way, but the foreword by Joe Swift. And it was really fascinating. You should read these. I won't put too much up because I'm sure that would be plagiarism. Excellent. And of Cabbages and Kings, The History of Allotments by Caroline Foley. This was absolutely fascinating. I have done a review of this book separately on my blog a few months ago. And it talks really, in great detail, going all the way back 1,000 years to the history of workers' rights and the history of allotments. Thank you very much for joining me today as I go through these books. Of course, I've read all of these so that you don't have to. I will be providing a bibliography for all of these down below in the description. Over my blog, link down below, there will be my notes that I've taken from these books, once again, so that you can take advantage. Some of these books are still worth a read, so if there's something in my notes that doesn't quite answer your question, at least you'll know where it came from, and so you can go read it yourself. Now, I need to take these, or not this one's mine. I need to take these back to the library, so I'll go off there now. Next video will be back in the community garden, so I'll see you there in a second. Ka kite anō. And this is actually quite useful. Now, a lot of the books about pull it together, Scott. All right, try that again. For fuck's sake, Scott, pull it together.